There were other songs of Moses in the Bible. Do you remember where you might find one or two of those other songs of Moses? One of them was in, beg your pardon? Yeah, one of them was in Exodus, just after they crossed the Red Sea, and it was primarily Miriam that sang the song. That's the one. Revelation. Well, the text in Revelation says that the witnesses around the throne were singing the song of Moses. And it doesn't really say which one, but it sounds kind of like the one we looked at last week. And then there's a psalm. I forgot the number, 90 something. There's a psalm that's labeled a song of, or a psalm of Moses. That's just FYI. And we talked about, I like that song. What was the purpose of the song? Beg your pardon? It was definitely primarily to remember. The idea of a song was that it could be carried down from generation to generation. And so the memory of these events, the memories of what the song talks about, what it was for, would be carried on from generation to generation. But Moses said specifically, this song will be a witness for me against you. Because Moses had basically given up being nice about it and said, well, God told Moses, he says, I know this people will quickly go astray. And all these things that we talked about, all these curses will fall upon them. And so the song is pretty, I mean, it's like some of those ballads you used to hear when you were, well, I used to hear when I was a teenager about the what was it, Teen Angel, the guy that rode his motorcycle and got killed and all this kind of stuff. It's a sad song. It's not a joyous song, you know. And the main purpose of the song was to remember that God told them this, and that he's still with them. It ends on a kind of a hopeful note, but anyway. So I thought I just wanted to review that. So tonight let's start in chapter 33. Let's see, the very end of chapter 32, God told Moses yet again to go up into the Abarim range to Mount Nebo in Moab across from Jericho and view Canaan. He says, and there you're going to die and be gathered to your people. Join your brother Aaron and your sister Miriam. So, Parashah 54 starts in chapter 33. So would somebody like to read? We'll take it up in little chunks, because this is what's happening here. Well, let's talk about this for a minute. Moses is going to bless the tribes. He's going to basically tell them what their future is going to be like from God's perspective. Now, have we seen the leaders of Israel bless their sons and their ancestors, or their sons and daughters before? John. Yep, Jacob did to his boys. Yep, at the very tail end of Genesis, Jacob called in the sons, and yep, but that was before he did that, and he told them about what was going to come upon them. Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was another one that I found that was kind of interesting. Go ahead. I don't know that it's about the tribes. So, that's okay. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is this, there's a precedent for this blessing the children of Israel and telling them kind of what's going to come upon them. So, it's not the first time we've done this. So let's read from the beginning of chapter 33 through the end of just verse 5 and talk about that for just a minute. So somebody like to read 33, 1 through 5? If you don't want to read, that's fine. I should have probably said a few more things. You want to read? That's good. David will read. You have to take the microphone, though.
Chapter 33, verse 1. And this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of Elohim, blessed his sons of Israel before his death. And he said, Yahuwah came from Sinai and rose up from Seir for them. He shone forth from Mount Paran. and he came from the myriads of holy ones. At his right hand a law of fire went forth to them. Yes, he loves the peoples. All his holy ones are in your hand, and they sit down at your feet. He lifts up each at your words. Moses has commanded a law to us, an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. And he was king in Yeshurun, when the heads of the people assembled, the tribes of Israel.
Okay. This is the beginning, as it's kind of in verse form here. So these first few verses are kind of a preamble. Let's see. Do you find any interesting things about the place names there? It says Yahuwah came from Sinai. What do you think that's a reference to? Yeah, Mount Sinai. It's that's where he gave the commandments, right? He dawned over them from Seir. You know where Seir is? Yeah.
I was just looking it up. They say that it's somewhere between Petra and Horeb.
Mhm.
So that area of Petra. And I was just reading Seir means rough, hairy, ruddy,
Okay.
like Esau's name.
Yep.
And so one of the interpretations of Seir is goat demon. But anyway, yeah, it's got this hairy thing. What was interesting to me is the word dawned in this passage, and it actually is Zerak, and it means to rise.
Okay.
And I can't help but think about the passage that says, and he will rise with healing in his wings. There's this idea of him rising,
Mm-hmm.
like the sun rises. It's this rising. And maybe that's why people had this affinity to worship the sun, because it rose every day, because the ancients knew that God rose. And this shining is comes from the root word yafa, which is to shine like brilliance,
Okay.
which is really interesting, like the Yafa Gate. I
Mhm.
didn't realize the
I
Yafa
didn't
was
either.
to shine or brilliance, like the Shekinah.
Okay. Interesting. It really is rather well known that Seir is supposed to be Petra. It's those mountains around. It's in. I can kind of show you here on the map. It's Petra. The Edomites, it says, are down here, south of the Dead Sea, and Petra literally exists right over in here. Now there's mountains here. The Dead Sea is well below sea level, but the mountains come up. I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 feet probably from the 1,000 feet below sea level. So they're not tall mountains, but they're clearly a mountain range, and it's rugged. It's not the kind of thing you go over easily. But then there's a big plateau out here. What do they call it? The King's Highway ran up this plateau right out here. But so Petra is in this mountain range right in here, and Petra was that land, this land right down here. Who's Edom? Esau. It was given to Esau by Isaac, and so it's that like I say, Seir is commonly known or thought to be in Edom. Oh, it is
Rugged. I mean,
yeah, it's rough.
what is the likelihood of God giving this rough, hairy guy a rugged, rough territory?
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
interesting how that works out.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot of interesting things about this area. You'll notice even on this map, this little town down here, Zoar. You remember Zoar? Is one of those 5 towns that was destroyed when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. I've been to Zoar. It's there. Boy, it's just a wide spot in the road. You'd have a hard time, other than the fact that there's a sign that says Zoar, you would never know you're in it. And that's where there's this little sign that points up to Lot's cave. We can talk about that. I've told that story too many times. But anyway, the Petra is right in there, and it's rugged, bottom line. Okay, it goes on. It says, he shone forth from Mount Paran. Mount Paran is actually, it's in the south here. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's in here somewhere. I'm not sure what the reference is to that. If anybody else knows, that's fine. But the one I really wanted to get to is he came with myriads of holy ones from the south, from his mountain slopes. This myriads of holy ones. What do you think about that?
Isn't that the Exodus? I mean, what?
Well, but this is talking about God. It says, Yahweh came from Sinai, and he dawned over Mount Seir. He shone forth from the mount, and he came with his myriads of holy ones. It could be the Israelites, perhaps. The tradition that grew up over this is that these are angels. God came with his host of angels. I looked the word up. It's not angels. It's, what is that word? Malach? Yeah, but it's not that word. It's kadoshim, which is holy ones. Yeah, so it's not angels. But there are 3 references, if you want to look. I'm just going to tell you rather than go there. There's Galatians 3:19, Hebrews 2:2, and my favorite one is Acts 7. Acts 7. Does anybody know what is in Acts 7?
That's Stephen
Yep.
giving the retelling of the Exodus and
Yep, that's Stephen giving his testimony before he gets stoned to death. And it's a short synopsis. It's a whole chapter, but it's a short synopsis of everything that happened to Israel. And he also refers to the fact that what all 3 of those verses have in common is they all refer to the fact that when God gave the Torah, he was accompanied by a whole host of angels, for what it's worth. Yeah.
I find it very interesting. The word 10,000 is revavot. It's plural, but the holy ones, or you said someone's interpretation says angels.
Mhm.
It's a singular word.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
It's not a plural
Yeah,
word. So how would you say 10,000
single ones.
holy?
Yeah.
10,000 holy.
No,
No.
it's just kadosh.
It's
But
yeah.
there's another form of it used in the next line down, because
Yeah,
it talks
mine
again
says
about
10,000.
that. And in verse 3 it says, "Surely it is you who love the people; all the holy ones are in your hand." And that's not kadosh; that's kadoshim, I think. But anyway, it's not a big deal. I just thought it was kind of interesting. I just wanted to bring it up that there is a tradition that existed at the time of Yeshua that when God gave the 10 Commandments, he was accompanied with a bunch of angels, like I say, for what it's worth.
but it's not really angels, it's holy ones. It'd be
Holy
more
ones.
accurate.
Yeah, and then, like I
Israel.
say, to me, from the context of what we're looking at, it could just easily be the Israelites.
Well, it says, if I am holy, so you be holy.
Holy one. Okay, that's a good point. And then, of course, you have to go back and ask yourself, so what's the word holy mean?
Well, he tells Israel, he says, I am holy, so you be holy.
But what does holy mean?
Set apart.
Set apart. That's all it means, is set apart. So it could very well be the Israelites, because they're definitely set apart. It could be, yeah. Anyway, I didn't want to beat it to death. I just thought it was kind of interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on there. David.
Gary found a really good verse, and then I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Psalm 85.
Okay.
Let me see if I can pull it up.
It's
Well, yeah, that's true. Jude talks about. Okay, good. You guys are good. What's your question, Gary?
Well, it wasn't a question. I just found this scripture in Obadiah.
Okay.
And it's, anyway, it says, in the house of Jacob shall be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall kindle in them and devour them.
That's interesting. Yeah, and that finally did happen. You know, Edom. Does anyone know kind of the history of the Edomites and what happened to them? Name a famous Edomite.
Esau?
Esau,
Besides
but
Esau?
after that. How about a famous Edomite that lived during the time of Yeshua?
King Herod.
Herod. Yeah. So the Edomites were kind of a thorn in the side for a long time.
I think
Yeah.
Balaam was an Edomite as well.
It might have been.
You
Okay.
research. Did you have a question, David?
Sayer.
Mhm.
I was reading Septuagint. It's in there. It says satyr, like the goat demon.
Uh-huh.
And when you brought up about Esau being turned to stubble, there's a verse in Malachi that says Esau's dwelling place will be a realm for dragons. So I thought maybe it was metaphorical for a demon. And I remember when I first came to B'nai Avram, Mark taught me that, on Yom Kippur, the Azazel goat,
Mm-hmm.
and when you mentioned just now how the terrain of Edom was real rugged and rocky, well, in Aramaic, Azazel actually means rough or rugged.
Okay.
And so when you mentioned how they might have pushed the scapegoat off the cliff, my question is, like, what's the relationship with the Azazel, the satyr, and this? It sounds sinister, but I've also had people tell me that this is actually going to be the safe place in Revelation. So I don't really understand how all that's supposed to.
Yeah, well, I don't either, but I do understand where it's the safe place comes from. There's some scriptures in one of the prophets, and I can't remember who, about how they'll escape from Jerusalem and they'll go toward Basra. And Basra is a city that's down in this area. And there's a bunch of people I know that are down in southern Jordan trying to make sure that there's a place for the Israelites to go whenever they have to escape. So there's something to that. I'm just not sure what. Let me go on. Verse 4 says, the law, let's see. Surely it is you who love the people, on verse 3. Surely it is you who love the people, all the holy ones are in your hand. At your feet they all bow down, and from you they receive instructions. Now, to me, that's pretty much talking about Israel, right? Because who are the who's the people that that God loves? He says, surely it is you who love the people. I don't know. That just seems obvious to me that it's the Israelites. From you, they receive instruction. That's the Torah, the law that Moses gave us, the possession of the assembly of Jacob. He was king over Jeshurun. Now, this Jeshurun name comes up every now and then. Does everybody know where that comes from and what it means? It means the upright one, and everywhere it's used, it's typically referring again to Israel, to the sons of Jacob. When the leaders of the people assembled along with the tribes of Israel. So that's just kind of a preamble.
Whoa, read that last verse again.
It says, he was king over Jeshurun
So,
when the leaders of the people assembled along with the tribes of Israel.
so Deuteronomy 33, verse 5 comes before 1 Samuel chapter 8 by a long shot.
Yes.
Who's the first king of Israel?
Well, here's on. That's for sure true. God. Obviously, God always intended that he would be the king, right? Yeah, that's a good point. First Samuel, what he's referring to in 1 Samuel chapter 8 is when the people said, no, we want a king like all the people around us have. And God says, no, you don't. And they said, yeah, we do. He said, well, okay, but you're not going to like it. Anyway.
Melech is the word here.
Yeah. So that whole section is just kind of a preamble to reinforce who's talking here. It's God. Whose people the Israelites are. They're God's. And so now we move into the different blessings for each of the tribes. So I can read this because they're pretty short, and then we'll just talk about them. Mark.
So talking about Bashan, the scriptures talks about how Yeshua is going to come from Bashan with his garment stained red with blood.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to go and he's going to do a battle. He's going to clean house. He's going to eliminate people there. I'm guessing to prepare that place. Maybe is why it says in Revelation that he's going to take his people to that place in the wilderness where they'll be nourished for this 3.5-year period. What's interesting about this Basra and Petra area is there's a constellation in the heavens called Cancer, and it's the crab, and where the two claws come together, it's like forming this circle in between his mouth and his claws, just like a pin area. Well, in biblical astronomy, it says that this area in between the claws is called Akubin, which in Hebrew and Arabic means the sheltering or hiding place.
Okay.
And it says another name, Ma'alaf, in Arabic means the assembled thousands.
Okay.
And we're talking about the myriads or the thousands of holy ones, which is the saints, the set apart ones. Here is telling us that's what this is talking about. This what man is called Cancer is this place where, as I said in biblical astronomy, the whole meaning of this constellation means the possession held fast.
Okay.
That's the meaning of it. So in this area of the possession held fast means the thousands upon 10,000s of the ones that he's gathered.
That's
that are protected.
Yeah, that's good support for that. And as you talk about, has anybody ever been to Petra? Yeah, it's a very interesting place. When you get into it, you go for about a mile down this canyon with canyon walls like hundreds of feet high, and it gets narrower and narrower. In some places, it's like single file, and you finally open up, and there's this big valley there with these carvings in the sandstone, and it's clear that there's room for a gazillion people in there. But it's not an easy place to find, number one, and it's definitely protected.
I like it that our passage today is talking about these thousands that are with him. Revelation talks about the thousands that are with him, and the heavens are declaring the exact same thing that the word is saying.
I agree. That's really good. It's interesting when all that stuff kind of ties together. Confirmation, right?
So you're saying that there's this narrow path to get to this wide open place, and it's hard to find?
Yep.
Kind of reminds me of the verse of straight is the path and narrow is the gate.
Yep. And wide's the road to destruction.
Yeah.
Yep. That'd be the King's Highway. The King's Highway is that wide road to destruction. That's good.
Comment over here. Comment over here.
Well, let's go ahead and we can look at the different prophecies for the individual tribes here.
I just had one more connection up.
Good.
Yeshua says when there's wars and rumors of wars, and they're in Jerusalem, right, he tells them to leave.
Yep.
And I think that's what happened in 70 AD when they first tried to seize the city, but they didn't have enough material. The Romans didn't.
Yeah.
So they laid back for a while. They laid back for a while, and then they left. And the Romans are, the Edomites.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and it's not at all unusual for prophecies of God to get fulfilled more than once, right? Anyway, moving along. Verse 6. Let Reuben live and not die, nor his men become few. I have a little footnote down there that says that word nor could also be translated as but. So it could say, let Reuben live and not die, but his men become few. And that actually makes more sense because of what happened to Reuben. You remember where Reuben ended up? That's why I got the map up here. Reuben was one of the ones that, along with Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh, that said they wanted their inheritance to be on the east side of the Jordan River. And so Reuben got the southern part here, and it turned out that those were one of the first ones to go when the Assyrians, what happened is, this is the way it looked after Joshua died, if you will. And then they went through the period of the judges, and then they decided they needed a king. And they had Saul and David and Solomon, and then they split into two kingdoms. And Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, and all the other stuff north of Judah became the northern kingdom of Israel, which within a couple hundred years was totally decimated by the Assyrians. Lived up here. So Reuben was destroyed, bottom line. Yeah.
Simeon what?
Simeon's down here. Well, we'll talk about him. He's coming up here in a minute. It's okay, no problem. Let's go on to the next one. Verse 7.
I just
Go ahead.
comment.
Yeah.
His compared to the verse, the blessing he had before with Jacob, this is an improvement, isn't it?
Well, that's true. That's true, because the blessing he had with Jacob was pretty bad.
It was hardly a
Yeah,
blessing.
Reuben, do you remember what Reuben's noteworthy activity was during his lifetime? He slept with one of his father's concubines. So Reuben was on the cutoff list. He was the eldest son, right? But it was pretty clear that Jacob didn't forgive him for that. So anyway, yep, lost his birthright. Verse 7 says, "And this he said about Judah. Hear, O Yahweh, the cry of Judah. Bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. Oh, be his help against his foes." Okay? These prophecies are suitably vague, right? Because they're not going to tell you everything that goes on. But as you know, Judah was the primary stakeholder in the southern kingdom. And bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. So, well, anyway. Yes?
So you've heard us talk about here when looking at the word helpmate, the way a woman was created for Adam. And the Hebrew word is ezer kenegdo. But focusing on an ezer, we've talked about how the idea of it was she was this like protection, not like a strong arm or physical protection, but she was spiritual protection to keep him focused on being a righteous man before God. What's interesting is in this word, and may you be a ezer against his adversaries. The word ezer here is being used again like it was in Genesis, that it's being a protection against the adversaries.
Okay.
Interesting how it's being used in that same context of protection right here in this verse.
That is interesting. Well, and you can also kind of see that from Judah's standpoint. To my way of thinking, then maybe this is wrong, but Judah is the tribe that's primarily responsible for keeping alive the faith, if you will, during most of history, because they continued, and it also goes into this. He defended his own cause, his own hands. I mean, the Jews kept the Torah to the best of their ability, if you will, but boy, they did it all pretty much in their own strength. I mean, it's not that God didn't help them, but they suffered a lot, but they're the ones that stood firm the whole time. Yeah. John?
I guess I'm a little curious about the order. I mean, I understand Reuben, he's the firstborn, and
Yep.
then you jump down to the fourth one.
Yeah, the order is not at all.
Well, the order I was thinking, if you go by the heads of the tribes,
Yep.
Reuben is the head of the ones in the south, I believe.
Mm,
And then,
you mean Judah?
no, and Judah is the head of the
Oh, you mean
ones
the way
in
they're
the
around
east.
the way they're around the tabernacle?
the
Yeah,
tabernacle.
yeah. Reuben's are in the south, and Judah's in the east. That's
But I don't
true.
know if that pattern goes through when they read this order.
Well, it kind of does. Let's go ahead. There's one of them even totally forgotten here, so we'll go on. The next one is pretty interesting, starting in verse 8. About Levi, he said, "Your Thummim and Urim belong to the man you favored. You tested him at Massa. You contended with him at the waters of Meribah. He said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them. He did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children, but he watched over your word and guarded your covenant. He teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Bless all his skills, O Yahweh, and be pleased with the work of his hands. Smite the loins of those who rise up against him, and strike his foes till they rise no more." Nice long thing, but now who are we talking about here?
Mr. Levi himself.
Mr. Levi himself, right? So,
A cynic would say they're getting good press from Levi, the one that's from the tribe of Levi.
there. Well, yes.
I'm being cynical of
Yes,
Moses.
but he's blessing the tribes of Israel. However, I think there's more to it than that. I mean,
Right.
yeah. There's the first of all, let's just go through it a little at a time. The Thummim and the Urim belong to the man you favored. Now, you remember what those are?
The
Okay, those the Urim. They're the things. They're very clearly referenced in Scripture, but they're not explained very well. That's the something in the lights, the perfections in the light, and they're thought to be stones that they fit in the breast piece that Aaron wore, and they were the stones that he would use to find out what God's instructions were. And there's lots of legend and lore that goes along with it. There's no scripture necessarily to explain it, but somehow or another, these stones would answer questions. God used them to speak, to help make decisions, or to help Aaron make decisions.
They were the stones representing the 12 tribes, right?
Yeah. And he says, to the man you favored. So who's the man he favored?
Aaron.
Aaron. It's Aaron, right? You tested him at Massa and contended with him at the waters of Meribah. You remember what those are about? That's more of a reference to Moses, probably. One of those is the place where Moses struck the rock rather than speak to the rock. There are places where the people essentially rebelled, and how can I put it? The people that should have been on top of the situation weren't. So that's what he means by you contended with him at the waters of Meribah and you tested him at Massa. They didn't come through with flying colors, let's say. No, both of those are well attested back in the Torah, and we can go back and see what each of them are, but I didn't do that. Let me go on because there's other stuff in here. You can do that if you want. He said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them, and he did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children. But he watched over your word, and he guarded your covenant. Now, what do you think that's a reference to?
Golden calf.
Well,
Why
do you think? Go ahead. Why do you think it's a reference?
He slaughtered the Levites. Slaughtered anybody that
okay.
that participated in the golden calf, including their own kinfolk.
Yep, that's fine.
That's
that
how I
fits.
read that anyway.
Okay, it's funny how this is what's interesting about this. You got that. I got something entirely different. Is that what you're going to say? The thing is in order for Aaron to do his job, he was not allowed to ever go through the traditional signs of mourning. So, and he, I think if you remember, we went back to this very thing in Leviticus. It says you can't mourn for the death of a close relative, and for the high priest, it was anybody, his son, your daughter, your mother or your father. You can't, you have to maintain. You have to do your job. Don't be getting your. Don't be throwing ashes in the air and all that kind of stuff. You had to maintain a state of ritual purity in order to do the job that you were called to do. And so I think that's what it is. He said of his mother and father, I have no regard for them. And he did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children. Well, remember? Aaron had his two sons die, right? And Moses kind of got after him because Aaron didn't eat some of the sacrifice that he was supposed to eat. And Aaron said to him, he says, look, I'm paraphrasing. He says, I've been through some tough times lately, I think he kind of cut me a little slack. And Aaron went to God, and basically, and God said, yeah, I think you should cut him a little slack. This is me paraphrasing. But the point is Aaron, several times, number one, his job required that he not do these things. And number two, he showed that he could do that. Yeah.
What do you think it means? It says he did not, mine says acknowledge, but acknowledge is not the Hebrew word. It says he did not recognize his brothers. And then it says, nor did he know his son, singular, not plural.
Ooh, that's interesting.
So I'm thinking, what is the son of the priesthood? What's the offspring of the the priesthood here.
Yeshua, you thinking?
I'm wondering if
that,
is this
that kind of fits. Yeah, I don't have a
that's the
problem with
end
that.
of verse 9.
Yep.
So I'm thinking, they did not recognize their brothers and did not know
Yep.
their own son,
Yep.
which is righteousness, because it says, if you look at the beginning, you talked about the Thummim and Urim would belong to your godly man. That's the Hebrew word is Hasidic, right? It's like godly, righteous.
Yeah.
So the offspring of, because they're supposed to teach the clean and unclean, holy and profane. So what's the offspring of the priest? The ultimate priest would be now Yeshua, who is the Melchizedek priest, and they didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
Did not
That's
know
good.
him.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about this kind of stuff is it means several different things on several different levels. So yeah, that's fine. I like that.
So
Yes.
I'm curious. What I was thinking was, and maybe I'm way off, but the Levites in control was Plan B, is how I look at it.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't the intent of the Levites to be the priest of the nation. It was supposed to be the firstborn.
Mhm.
So is that what he's not acknowledging? He's not acknowledging their firstborn because they gave up that authority.
Yeah. Yeah. That
And
fits as well.
also for they have observed thy word and kept thy covenant. Well, the covenant was seriously challenged at Mount Sinai.
Yep.
So again, I think I'm not saying that yours isn't not right either,
No,
but
no,
I'm
no.
just saying
Well,
that
I
both
think-
of them could apply, definitely.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. See, verse 10, it says, he teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Bless all his skills, O Yahweh, and be pleased with the work of his hands. Smite the loins of those who rise up against him, and strike his foes till they rise no more. All of that sounds like the priest, right?
Well, they're supposed to teach the law, to teach the Torah,
Absolutely.
and the judgments that come from the Torah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is, we see in a lot of these prophetic blessings that it can still be carrying on today.
Mm-hmm.
So amongst the nations of the earth, amongst the peoples of the earth, what peoples would you say over the last several hundred years have had mine says sustenance, but the Hebrew word is chel, which is from the root chayil, which means strength, wealth, or army. So what strength, wealth, or army has been blessed? And it says, and those who hate him, so that they will not rise again. Who has been protected from having enemies rise up against them?
Israel.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mike, he looks like he's got something interesting here.
Well, I just had another thought about when Jesus said, you must hate your father and mother in order to follow me. This kind of goes in line with that, where he doesn't, saying he doesn't know or recognize his parents or whatever, but he guards the word.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same idea.
Yes, it is. It's very much the same idea. The whole idea of not showing the traditional signs of mourning for the loss of a loved one was only to emphasize the fact that his devotion to God and the jobs that God had him do needed to take precedent over even that. And that's exactly what Yeshua meant when he said that too.
So if Yeshua came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and they're supposed to be a nation of priests and kings, then you're supposed to be acting like the priest.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yep. Yep. That all fits. Any other thoughts about the Levi section? I thought that was I could get a little out of that one. Let's move on to verse 12. About Benjamin, he said, let the beloved of Yahweh rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long. And the one Yahweh loves rests between his shoulders. See, some of these are a little bit vague. Now, that's a little bit vague in my book.
I have a comment on that.
Yeah.
So it says, may the beloved of the Lord dwell in security by him. Benjamin's right next to Jerusalem, and the Lord rests at Jerusalem.
Yep. That's exactly.
He's literally here way before they even enter the land.
Yep.
he ends up being right next to him, dwelling right next to the Lord, like it says.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's and not only that, but even the between the shoulders thing. Jerusalem doesn't sit on a big hill. It sits between some higher areas, and it kind of looks like it's between the shoulders, you know? So that all fits.
I'm curious, is Bethlehem in Benjamin?
Yes. Well, nope, I lied. It shows it's right in Judah. I don't know whether that's for sure true. I know that it's just 15 or 20 miles. Yeah, I did too. I don't know. Want to move on?
So I'm just
Yeah.
going by my analogy. If you go start south of Reuben, go up to the east is Judah.
Mhm.
Levi's in the middle.
Mhm.
Benjamin is one of the tribes going west.
Yeah, actually, it's Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. All three of them are on the west.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so the next one up there is Joseph. And Joseph would be Ephraim and Manasseh, essentially, right? So let's read about Joseph here, starting in verse 13. He says, about Joseph, he said, may Yahweh bless his land with the precious dew from heaven above and with the deep waters that lie below. With the best the sun brings forth and the finest the moon can yield. With the choicest gifts of the ancient mountains and the fruitfulness of the everlasting hills. With the best gifts of the earth and its fullness and the favor of him who dwelt in the burning bush. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph and on the brow of the prince among his brothers. In majesty he is like a firstborn bull. His horns are the horns of a wild ox, and with them he will gore the nations, even those at the ends of the earth. Such are the 10,000s of Ephraim and the thousands of Manasseh. So there's a lot there. You see a lot, I bet. Yeah.
I missed some of this stuff before. Okay, so the favor, we know that's it's retzon, so favor, which oftentimes gets associated with grace. So it's the favor or grace of him who dwelt in the bush. Well, who was in the bush?
God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you could say Yeshua.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So if Joseph is the one to receive the favor of the one in the bush, well, that's the grace that modern church says that they received through the death and resurrection of Yeshua.
Hear, hear. And not only that, but this 17, in his majesty, like the firstborn bull, his horns, the horns of a wild ox, and with them he'll gore the nations, even those at the ends of the earth. Well, that's essentially what happened to Ephraim and Manasseh, right? They were dispersed throughout the entire earth. And here we are today, essentially.
What's the Hebrew word for favor? What's the Hebrew word there for favor? I'm looking for it in verse. Okay. Good thereof and for the goodwill is what it says in the King James. Okay.
Well, I found something interesting, maybe not so interesting, something curious about this particular part too. Beg your pardon?
Yeah, when you just read verse 17,
Mhm.
it talks about Ephraim and Manasseh, like gore thousands to the ends of the earth, and it mentions the crown. People often forget that even though Judah is the kinship and Levi's the priesthood, Joseph gets the firstborn, like the double portion.
Yep.
And if you take any credence to Stephen Cohen's research on the lost tribes, if you think about it, the United States and Britain have conquered, at least in the past, their vast empires. And in Genesis 49, there's a very specific prophecy where it says that Ephraim and Manasseh will inherit the gates of their enemies.
Mhm.
So if you take that as land or sea gates won in war, like Gibraltar,
Mhm.
Guam, Virgin Islands, etc.
I agree. That's a good one. Yeah. As I was reading through this, I happened to notice this talk in the beginning of it, verse 13. May the Lord bless his land with the precious dew from the heaven above and the deep waters from the lie below, or the best the son can bring forth, and the choice, all that stuff. It reminded me of when Isaac blessed Jacob. Remember when Jacob stole the blessing from Esau? So I went back and found that, and I'm just going to read it. It's in chapter 27 of Genesis. So finally, when Jacob had convinced him that he was really Esau, Isaac says to him, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that Yahweh has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew and of the earth's richness an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you, and may those who cursed you be cursed, and those who blessed you be blessed. So I thought that kind of fits in with that too. And that's a nice tie-in. All of this stuff, when you look at it long enough, it all ties together. These are not different things that go like this. They're different things that all come back together. So this...
Well, that sounds like Joseph himself when he had the dream of the sun and the moon and the 10 stars.
Yep, exactly. So all of these lead to the same conclusion, and they just have spread themselves out over several thousand years. Okay, so now we get to some, Polly.
I've been trying to kind of look back and forth between the blessings that were given in Genesis 49 to the sons compared to these blessings to see what correlation might be, because I know Moses was probably very familiar with them.
Yep, that's a good point.
And I haven't been able to keep up with you, but I did see, I did notice one in what you just read. Let me see if I can find it again.
It was Joseph?
Yeah, in Joseph, verse 16, the middle of 16 is word for word identical to 49. Let's see. Anyway, it's the same blessing. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph and on the brow of the prince among his brothers, or separated from his brothers. Anyway, yeah. Word for word, same phrase. So be interesting to see the correlation between them all, how they compare or differ from the blessing in 49.
Yeah, I bet if you did that, not only just with the ones at the end of Genesis and this, but several of the others, I'm sure you'd find incredible consistencies. Yeah. So let me go on verse 18. About Zebulun, he said, "Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and you, Issachar, in your tents. They will summon peoples to the mountain, and there offer sacrifices of righteousness, and they will feast on the abundance of the seas, on the treasures hidden in the sand." First of all, that requires that we know something about those two tribes. And, I'm pretty good with, Judah and Benjamin, or Judah and Jacob, some of them like that. But some of these, Zebulun, I'm not too familiar with that. So I had to kind of go look that up a little bit.
Are they sons of Leah, or are they of the concubine? Or are they?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. It's easy to find out, but I can't remember. But I did find it interesting that they're here. All right, they're not. They don't have a lot of land, but they're beside each other, and so that's what that at least kind of indicates why they're blessed at the same time. It's commonly thought that Zebulun was a bunch of explorers, and that Issachar were students, and so the tents represented the students that they, the studying that they would do, and Zebulun was the explorers. But that's all I have on that. If anybody else has some other stuff, that'd be good.
So can we go?
Yes.
Can we have a question on verse 14. What does that mean? We can back up a little bit.
Verse 14.
For the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon.
Yeah.
Is that the feast?
I found that a little bit
Is that
funny.
about the feast, maybe?
Could be. It says, verse 14 says, "With the best the sun brings forth, and the finest the moon can yield." Now, obviously, they're talking about the sun, so I guess they felt they would be symmetrical to talk about the moon. Now, I don't know. I'm just guessing here, but could it be that somehow or another they felt like the moon might have something to do with crop, the the
So here's a
way crops
bizarre-
grow. I don't know.
A bizarre thing.
Mhm.
The moon, and this is kind of getting off. The movement of the moon can kind of like water the plants because it pulls the water out of the ground in various. It's sort of like
Uh-huh.
kind of a weird thing, but
Yeah, it might.
it moves the water in the ground a little bit and kind
Yeah.
of waters the plants
Yeah,
without it raining.
I guess I wouldn't be a bit surprised that there were some, I don't want to put it, some thoughts or some ideas that the moon had something to do with agricultural production and agricultural fertility. I mean, when you go back and you read the Farmer's Almanac,
Right.
they seem overly occupied on the different phases of the moon and stuff like that.
What's
So
a
I think-
harvest? What's a harvest moon?
yeah, I think the idea of considering the sun and the moon both in the production of your food crops is not unusual. I'm just stabbing at the dark here, but it's not outside of what you'd expect, and it certainly doesn't emphasize, the fact that the pagans, just because it mentions the moon doesn't indicate you're supposed to give it any spiritual significance. The moon is just a body like the sun.
Well, the pagans never invent anything. They just pervert what we already have, right?
Fair enough.
There's nothing new under the sun or the moon.
Or the good. That's a good way to put that. So I didn't have much else on Zebulun and Issachar.
There is a prophecy. I don't know where it is offhand about a fascinating prophet or thing about Issachar. It says, "Go ask Issachar. He knows the prophecy."
Oh, really?
Is that, you know what that is, Dave?
Gary just found it in Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
It says, and of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times and what Israel ought to do. And since Zebulun, you said, were like the seafaring merchants, it was believed that they supported Issachar while he taught.
Okay, that makes sense. There's, like I say, you could see how you could spend a lot of time tracking this stuff down. Yeah. Well, I'm going to move along. Verse 20, about God, he said, "Blessed is he who enlarges God's domain. God lives there like a lion, tearing at arm or head. He chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. When the heads of the people assembled, he carried out the Lord's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel." Okay, so Gad's here. So he's another one of these guys that, suggested to Moses that he be allowed to accept his inheritance on the east side of the Jordan River rather than cross into the land that God had originally promised them. And so I think that's what it means. Enlarges his domain. He lives there like a lion, tearing at arm or head. He chose the best land for himself, okay? Because he got there and he says, "Hey, this is great land. I think we ought to just stay here." The leader's portion was kept for him, and when the heads of the people assembled, he carried out the Lord's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel. Now, do you know what happened to Gad? Yeah, they were the first. They, along with Reuben and this bunch of half of Manasseh, were the first ones that got nailed by the Assyrians, because the Assyrians came down this way, and then they started that way to take the Samaria and the rest of the northern kingdom, moving to the west. Yeah.
So in the King, I'm just curious, the King James says it a little bit different, I think.
Okay.
And he provided the first part for himself because there in a portion of the lawgiver was he seated.
Portion of the. Oh, really? I wonder what that means.
Well, I looked it up
Good.
and I'm looking right now. Chachak, I think that had to do with like the judgments, the type of decree, lawgiver, governor, decree. So anyway,
Okay. I'm sorry. These some of these lesser tribes really kind of buffalo me. Like the next one's probably the worst one of all. Dan says, Dan is a lion's cub springing out of Bashan. That's all it says. So now there's a couple things we can note about that. We can note that Dan, it shows Dan's land over here. Turns out that Dan was given that, but he was never able to hang on to it. And so he finally ended up migrating up to the north here. And that's why there's a town up there called Dan, is eventually his tribe ended up way up here to the north.
Dan the man got in his van and moved.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't that up there the head of the Jordan is up there? It's nice land up there.
Oh yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
very nice land. Very nice land. It's also that was one where the more flagrant idol worship went on in the kingdom of Israel. Was up in the north there. Were you going to say something, Holly or Mark?
Don't know if this is anything, but everyone wonders why Dan's not listed over in the Brit portion on the numbering of the
Yep.
people. And we know that Bashan is the place that Yeshua is coming back with his garment stained. I mean, he's gone there to do battle. How that pertains to Dan, that Dan is the guy that leaps forth from Bashan, I don't know.
I don't
But
either.
whoever's in Bashan, they're going to get wiped out.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Yeah,
Just-
David has something.
You just mentioned Dan in the 144,000. In Psalm 23, there's a part where Yeshua said that the bulls of Bashan surrounded him. They were one of his tormentors. So, being that Dan, like you said, worshiped the idols and became a majority of the Samaritans, I don't know if that means if a good deal of Danites were instrumental in his torture and execution. So perhaps that's the reason
It could be.
he's not there.
Yeah.
And the only other thing was Gad. I'm not sure if this is correct, but mine, instead of saying he shall live like a lion, it actually says lioness.
Okay.
And you mentioned that Assyria captured them. They are one of the first. There's actually a latter-day example in history where Gad got revenge on Assyria
Okay.
because it was just like how the Nazis or the Prussians, they made lampshades out of human skin. The Assyrians actually did that.
Oh, I believe that.
And some of Gad, because we know it's pronounced God, it means fortune or luck.
Yep.
That Assyria they are called the young lions, which is often a metaphor for, like kind of an arrogant kind of destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Antichrist is called the Assyrian. And it mentions in this prophecy his strength. But what's funny is that when Hitler conquered Poland and France and those cluster of countries, he went around Switzerland because they require every citizen to be armed. He was afraid to touch them.
Good point. Anything else? I'm going to move on here. We have verse 23 about Naphtali. He said, Naphtali is abounding with the favor of Yahweh and is full of his blessing, and he will inherit southward to the lake. Okay, now Naphtali ended up with this area up in here, Nazareth and everything to the northwest of the Sea of Galilee. So what do you think southward to the lake might mean? What lake? Yeah. I'm sure, I think it's kind of interesting that just that little bit of geography is correct. He will inherit southward to the lake, and it would appear that that's the case. Verse 24 says, about Asher, he said, the most blessed sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him bathe his feet in oil. The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze, and your strength will equal your days. So Asher ends up with this. Now, all of this land here is probably some of the most fertile in Israel. You know, it's really good land. So Naphtali and Asher ended up with some really good stuff up there. Mm-hmm. Yep, yep. That could be the reference here to the oil. The most things talk about it as bathing your feet in oil is something that rich people do. You know, so Asher, they think was probably a very materially successful tribe, and they had lots of wealth. I don't know. Go ahead.
I was absent for a moment.
We didn't say anything too noteworthy. Why?
What did you say about the Naphtalians?
Naphtalians, it says here that they will inherit south to the lake, southward to the lake.
Stevens thinks they're the modern day Swedes. And I point that out because that's where I'm from.
Oh,
Regional
you're a
Marcy.
Naphtalian,
I'm
huh?
a Naphtalian.
That sounds kind
I'm
of like
an
something-
Oregonian and a Naphtalian. That's a mix.
those sound kind of like something you'd hear on Star Trek. Okay, and then as somebody pointed out, one of the tribes is not listed in this list. Which one is it? Simeon. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, here it is. Here's Simeon. Well, let's see. As a matter of fact, I've got a note to that effect. Let me see if I can get you there so that. Well, yeah.
What was that?
He said they would be scattered. I've got this here. Let me find it.
Well, they're the ones that were in cahoots with the Levites, which is Moses, his kinfolk. And it's kind of funny that I'm wondering if there was some bad blood between those two, even though they were very close in the birth order and very close in what they did. That, I don't know, I'm just theorizing.
Well, it could be, I suppose. Darn it, I had that. I wrote it even down here so I could. First Chronicles.
Aren't they mentioned together in Jacob's?
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense for Levi because they're the ones that.
Levi's, yeah, and Simeon too. What really happened here was over time, since the inheritance of Simeon was completely within Judah, it wasn't long before they were just considered one, is what happened. They got lost, if you will, in Judah. But I have something. There's something that they wrote about that in Chronicles, and I was going to read it, but I lost my reference to it. So I'll try to find it. Yeah, it could be hidden in plain sight. Yeah. Anyway, let's. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, in Genesis 49:5, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their weapons are instruments of violence or cruelty. When their sister Dinah was raped by Shechem the Canaanite, and Jacob had the covenant with them, if they're circumcised, they'll be as one people. It was Simeon and Levi that reneged on the agreement and slaughtered them. So perhaps this was like a punishment from Jacob, that rather than having a unique identity, they be dispersed among many of the tribes, just like you can find a Levite in every gate of each tribe.
I think you're exactly right, and I think so. That's essentially what happened to both of them, because Simeon lost their tribal identity within Judah, and Levi lost their tribal identity, because they were throughout Israel. Yeah, I agree.
So I had a theory as to, in those verses, they're obviously put in a very bad light. But Levi is sort of raised up by becoming the tribe of Levi, the priest. Simeon, I'm wondering if my thinking was, isn't that Peter? Peter Shimon? Was he a Simeonite?
Yeah, might have been. I did.
So he was sort of brought back Simeon.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah. Yeah. No, they didn't. They weren't prominent in any way. They became kind of lost in the shuffle. Let me read on the last of the. We'll be about finished with this. I'm pretty pleased here. Starting starting in verse 26. There is no one like the God of Jeshurun, who rides on the heavens to help you, and on the clouds in his majesty. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemy before you, saying, destroy him. So Israel will live in safety alone. Jacob's spring is secure in the land of grain and new wine, where the heavens drop dew. Blessed are you, O Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by Yahweh? He is your shield and helper and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will trample down their high places. It was kind of a nice way to end it. Yes.
I guess the way I look at that is, if Israel doesn't do well, it looks bad for God,
That's a fair way to look at
right?
that. Yep.
No
Yep.
pressure or anything, but do the right thing.
Yeah. I like the verse 27. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemy before you, saying, destroy him. Any other thoughts about these prophecies? It's interesting. I mean, I go away from these feeling kind of mixed, because some of them I can really look at them and say, oh, yeah, I get that, and I get that, and I get that. Others, I just kind of go, I don't have any idea. But all of it ties together, and the more we do this, the more we're going to learn. You guys brought up some really good points, tying some of this stuff back to, for example, the prophecies that Jacob gave in Genesis 49 or wherever it was. So we'll just let it sit. We'll be back here in a year or so. Who would like to read chapter 34, the whole thing? Somebody want to read the whole of chapter 34?
Want me to read it?
You can read it.
And Moses went up from the plains of Moab, under the mountain of Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, that is over against Jericho. And Yahweh showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan, and all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah unto the utmost sea, and the south in the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, unto Zoar. And Yahweh said unto them, this is the land which I swore unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give unto thy seed, I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of Yahweh. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moshe had laid his hands upon him, and the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as Yahweh commanded Moses. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face, in all the signs and the wonders which Yahweh sent to him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants, and to all his land, and in that mighty hand, and in all the great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel.
The end. So there's a Hebrew phrase that we're supposed to say now. I never can remember it.
Kazak, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Can I say one more thing? And
Yes, please.
I kind of told Polly I would do it.
Okay.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. That's the first verse of Genesis 1:1.
Oh, all right. All right. So that's what you do. As soon as you get to this point, you're at the very last line of the scroll, and what they typically do is they dance around and sing songs and wind the scroll back up, and then they open it up at Genesis 1:1, and they read the first line of Genesis 1:1 to show that this is a continual cycle, which is a good thing. It took me a while to get used to the idea that That's really the Hebrew way of learning. And at first I kind of, struggled against it. But as I've seen in doing it, yeah, if you go through it again, you'll be surprised what you pick up that you didn't see before. And not only that, but it happens every time. Yeah. Where is that?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I was watching this video. There's these 119 ministries on
Yep.
YouTube, but they were talking about that. I forgot my train of thought. Oh, well.
Was it going through it in cycles?
Oh yeah, how when Yeshua told his followers, listen to the Pharisees, for they sit in the seat of Moses, but don't do what they
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
because their tradition is they would just read
Yeah.
the Torah, and that's how they learned. So you just
Yeah.
made me think of that.
Yeah, but one of the things that you got to do is you got to read it to understand it and then to do it.
Right.
Because I don't know how many people I've met that, oh yeah, I've read the Bible. I read it every year. And boy, you'd never know it. You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to put anybody down, but that's why I like doing what we do, because
Bible in here.
you're forced to deal with this. If you don't understand it, fine. We don't understand it. But you'll be surprised what you'll understand next year that you didn't understand this year. So,
Well, it was also in this video they were talking about the new converts, the Gentile converts. They gave them 4 things to do: abstain from food,
offer to
sacrifice to
idols,
idols, no fornication,
don't blood.
no blood. And people use that, the antinomians, saying, well, that's all you need to do
Yeah.
as a new Christian.
Yeah.
But the idea is that, well, yeah, that's because they had no understanding of the Torah.
Yeah, yeah.
But as they grow, when they listen to the Torah being read each week, that's how they learn about it. That was just a starting point.
Yeah, that's all it was. It
And-
was saying, okay, do these 4 things, and then you're good. Now go off and start learning this stuff. Yeah.
But the antinomians want to say, well, that's not the beginning, that's the end. Hey,
Yeah. Right. We're done now.
Well, if you read that verse, it says, "Go where they teach the law of Moses." That's the part. That's the part the
That's the part
antinomians
they like to
slip
leave
up,
out.
yeah.
Well, and the other thing is the 2 things they get us for most. First of all, you're going back under the law. Like we believe that you have to be obedient in order to be saved. Hasn't got anything to do with it. The saving is already there. We're done with that. But how do you live? Now that you're saved, what do you do? I actually I've been taught this, well, all you got to do is love the Lord with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and then just do whatever you want. Well, the idea is, if you think about it, the idea is if you do that, then your mind will be, and heart will be like his, and then everything you want to do is what he wants to do. But they don't tell you that part. They just kind of make it like, yeah, whatever. And boy, that's got to be wrong. There's just something wrong with that picture, In order to kind of, let's see, there's 2 more things I want to talk about. There's this thing on the internet called thebibleproject.com, and they have a lot of little instructional videos. They're all kind of short, and they have them for the books of the Torah, as well as lots of other books. They're antinomians, but you'd never know it by the stuff they do. But I have the one for the book of Deuteronomy. Marvin suggested we do this, and you have to kind of pay attention because it goes pretty fast. But it's a good summary of the book of Deuteronomy, and so I thought I'd play it, and you can watch it, and we'll watch it together because it's one of these kind of things. You can go on thebibleproject.com and easily find it, and so you can watch it at home if you want to watch it again. But I thought, we'll see. This will be a good test for Dave because I don't know whether he can get this up there or not. Well, that's closer. No. It's you go to the browser. There you go. The book of Deuteronomy. You're real close. Now back it up to the beginning. It's only 6 minutes long, so it's not a big deal. Well, you can put your cursor over here so you can see it. You would move it to the right more. Click on it. There you go. Now go. There you go. You're at the beginning. Okay, fine. Go for it.
The book of Deuteronomy.
Now turn up the
is a
volume.
Conclusion to the And Moses thinks that loyalty to the Lord their God is the only way to life. Now, notice these key words in the Shema: listen and love. You're going to find these words all over this opening section of the speech. The word listen in Hebrew means more than just let sound waves come into your ears. It includes the idea of responding to what you hear. So for Israel, this means responding to God's grace by obeying the laws of the covenant.
And then listen is always followed by love.
Yeah, so love is the true motivation for obeying the laws. Israel won't obey without love, and they don't truly love if they don't obey. So there's this tight connection between loving and listening that runs through the entire book. And so Moses tells them that if they do listen and love, they will fulfill their original calling as the family of Abraham, to show all of the nations the wisdom and justice of God, and so become a blessing to them.
The second big section in Deuteronomy is a large block of laws and commands.
And this is where the book gets its name. Deuteronomy means a second law. And it's because many of these laws we've heard before. In fact, in the first line of the book, we're told that Moses is here explaining or clarifying the laws. So he's repeating and expanding on the laws, making them relevant to this new generation.
There's laws about how Israel's to worship God, laws about their leadership structure, laws about social justice, and then some more laws about their worship.
Now, after all of the laws, Moses warns Israel of the consequences of their obedience or disobedience, or in his words, the blessing or the curse. If they listen and love, they will experience blessing and abundance in the land. And if they don't, there's going to be famine and plagues, and they'll be forced off their land into exile.
And that brings us to the final section of his speech.
Yeah, here Moses says, I set before you today life or death, blessing or curse. So choose life. But then things get really interesting, because after 40 years with these people, Moses knows they're not going to obey, and so he predicts their failure and even their future exile from the promised land. And he focuses on what he thinks is the true source of the problem, that they have hard and selfish hearts. It's as if Israel is incapable of truly loving God in a way that brings about obedience.
But this problem isn't unique to Israel.
Yeah, in fact, Moses, when he's using this language about blessing and curse, he's tying Israel's story all the way back to all humanity's story from Genesis 1 through 3.
So Adam and Eve, they were blessed by God just like Israel, and given a choice to trust and obey God like Israel.
And then they rebelled and brought a curse on the land, like Moses knows Israel is going to do. And so these stories, they're about Israel's hard heart, but they're actually a window into the universal human condition.
But Moses doesn't give up hope entirely.
That's right. He says that somehow, on the other side of Israel's exile, God promises to transform their heart so that one day they truly can listen and love.
In the final chapters, Joshua is appointed as the new leader of Israel.
And then Moses takes the entire law code,
The one he just predicted Israel would break.
that's right, and he puts it into the Ark of the Covenant. And then Moses hikes up to the top of a mountain so he can see the promised land from afar, and then he dies. And that's how the Torah ends.
Which is a strange place to end the story. I mean, it's right there at the climax. Will they obey the laws and live faithfully in the land or not?
Well, the story does continue right into Joshua, the next book of the Bible, but this is the end of the Torah, and it's been ended here for a reason. The Torah is written for people who are either outside of the land or who are still waiting for the fulfillment of God's promise to bless the whole world. And so now, as each generation reads the Torah, they find themselves called to hope in what Moses hoped for, a new, transformed heart that one day can truly listen and love.
That's pretty good, huh?
Hey guys, with this video, the Torah
You can turn
series
that off
is
if you want.
complete. It was 2 years in the
That's-
making.
That's their
We're super
advertising pitch. Yep. Like I say, you can go find them all, and all of them are pretty good. You know, like I said, I find, let's see, as we get more and more firmly based in what we're doing here and what we understand, you can watch this kind of stuff and you can see where the antinomian stuff is got. But there wasn't much in there. I mean, I thought the way they centered the whole thing around the Shema was a pretty good way to look at the book of Deuteronomy, really. Yeah. Okay, let's see. I don't have enough time, so I won't do it. I'll do it next time. I was going to talk about Psalm 119. I can talk about it for just a minute. You know anything interesting about Psalm 119? Longest chapter in the Bible, right? Yeah. It's, I forgot, 179 verses, 176 verses, something like that. It's very interesting because it's got stanzas, and it's got 22 stanzas in it. And each stanza is associated with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And then there are 8 lines in each stanza. And if you multiply 8 times 22, you get how many verses there are in chapter 119. And every single verse is about the Torah. Every single verse talks about, that's God's truth and how that's the way you should live, and on and on. The most interesting thing is the 8 verses in each stanza each line begins with the Hebrew letter of that verse, or of that stanza. So, I was going to go read some, but we don't have time. Well, Lamed is a nice stanza. Every single verse in that stanza, if you look at it in Hebrew, starts with the character Lamed. So they call that an acrostic. So it's this huge acrostic poem. So that's really neat. Spending some time in 119 is a good idea. That, by the way, is where that 119 Ministries gets their 119. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. We talked about earlier, next week we could just begin again with Genesis. I got a bunch of stuff that's coming up in my life that's going to be difficult, so I'm going to do some different things. I'm going to do a few things different next week, and then I'm going to be gone for about 3 weeks in April, and so I'm making official notice here that we're going to start Genesis 1:1 on the 17th of April. Okay? In the meantime, we'll meet every Tuesday, and I've got some other stuff to present that I'd like to go over with you. And then my final thing is I have graduation presents. So I got to give you, by the way, if there's anybody still online and they want to email me, I'll give them a graduation present too. But these are old bookmarks. And I'll tell you what, I'll let you have them, and then you can look at them, and you bring them back next week, and we'll talk about them. Because you may think that's just so much hooey, but I like them. What? That's okay. You deserve one. We trust you. You'll be back. No. But my son's getting married, and that's a big deal because he's having the wedding here, and they're from Japan, and then they're doing something in Japan associated with being married, and we're going to go do that. So that's what I'm busy doing. So anyway, I wanted to talk about these, but I'll talk about them next week. All right? Are there any other issues, questions, or concerns? Yes.
I wanted to hear what you had to say about Psalm 119. Are you going to talk about it next week?
Well, I don't have a lot to say about it. I was just going to read some of it because every time, given what we do, we could probably read a stanza and spend 10, 15 minutes talking about it. And I'm happy to do that. But if you'd be interested in doing that, I'd like to look at it. Reading Psalm 119 is neat because number one, everything it says in there is kind of profound. But number two, you kind of get the idea, this really is all about the Torah, certainly all about His Word, I want to see how do I put this? If you don't have something like the Scripture to sit here and focus on, what on earth are you believing in? You're either believing in some fabrication that you've made up, or you're believing in some stuff that somebody told you. This is neither of those, You can't read this and make up something contrary to it, and have any degree of intellectual honesty. And this is not something that somebody told. It's not written by one guy. It's authenticated, beyond anything ever existing in the world today. That's just unbelievable. It's the perfect rock on which to build your faith. So I get excited about the Torah.
The only other thing I wanted to say, those 4 commandments in Acts 15 for new converts. Avi ben Mordecai sequentially numbered the letters in the Torah start to end. And in the exact mathematical center, the heart of the Torah, is a part in Leviticus with those 4 things.
That's pretty interesting. I could believe that. I kept you a little late, but we started late because of technical difficulties. Let me close in prayer, okay? That's just a second. Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for your Torah. Thank you that we were able to finish it, and I just thank you for the ability to go through it and start again. And I thank you for these group of people that are interested in it, and ask that you keep them safe and to think on these things until we get together next week. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Jerry.